listening to Over the Oxer podcast with Tracy Cole for all things to do with the mind for equestrians. Today I want to talk about flow. And if you've ever been in a state of flow, you'll know what I mean. And if you haven't, it's a state that you really want to get into. So what's flow? What's it all about? Why do we need it? How are we going to get into it? That's what I'll be talking about today. Eating. It's almost like you're in this bubble. You and your horse working together in harmony. There's not really any critical thinking. There are minor adjustments, but everything literally flows. So obviously we can see that for riders, this is the state that we want to be in. It's being in the zone. It's being at peak performance. It's enabling us, whether we're riding or competing, to achieve our maximum. And it's doing so without fatigue. And it's doing so without heavy concentration in terms of that almost forced concentration in doing something that you don't really want to do. So flow is a state where self-reflection has gone. And by that I mean the negative self-reflection isn't there. So the critical voice, the self-criticism, the worrying, thinking about yourself, thinking about how you look as a rider, what other people might be thinking. There's a complete absence of all of that. It's about being totally immersed in what you're doing, and you can feel completely absorbed in it. Nothing else matters. And you find that top athletes, people who do well at sport, can attain this state of flow. But also, it could be that you were doing something artistic or something with crafts. You could be reading, you could be doing puzzles, you could be gaming. It's that moment where time flies. Your perception of time is altered because you're so absorbed in what you're doing. You're getting lost in it almost. And it's sometimes called peak performance. It's sometimes called being in the zone. But rather unusually compared to other states that we're in, especially when we're riding, you don't feel tired mentally or physically. You don't feel that you're sort of pushing things. You don't feel bored. You don't feel that things are going wrong. You don't feel overly challenged. You don't feel that need that, you look at your watch and you think, I've been riding 15 minutes. I need to do another X amount of minutes or something like that. You don't feel that. You're in that flow and the time is immaterial. And there's been lots and lots of scientific studies on flow. And the leading person in the flow community is a man called, and I hope I get his name right, he's a Hungarian American. So it's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Okay, I'll probably just say it the once. If you look at his spelling, unless you know Hungarian or maybe similar languages, it's quite a lengthy name, with lots of letters that don't look right together in English. But he termed this state flow, and it's a perfect term because it just tells you that everything is a little bit more liquid and easy and smooth. And it's a time of feeling optimistic and hopeful. It might be connected with dopamine. We'll have a little chat about that in a moment. So that's the reward hormone. It's thought that in this time that parts of the frontal lobe of the brain, so right kind of like your forehead kind of region, those frontal lobes, some parts of those, which are to do with critical thinking, analytical thinking, it's the human part of our brain. It's that very logical style of thinking. Some parts of those frontal lobes are less active. So those parts in particular that are concerned with being very introspective but critical and worrying at the same time, those parts are far less active. And in fact, in 2020, two researchers, Leroy and Sharon, decided that they would look at which part of the brains were active and which part of the brain wasn't active. And they studied, just makes me smile, a tightrope walker. So how much in the flow do you need to be to walk a tightrope? Probably considerable amount of flow going through you. And they decided that it was that critical thinking that had no room in the flow state and was pushed out and was really depressed in the flow state. So what's all of this got to do with riding? Well, as you can imagine, just about everything. Imagine now that harmonious feeling of being totally in sync with your horse. And you're totally in the moment. And it's working out together. And you're not having to think about your nerves. You're not having to do anything actively to shut down your nerves because there aren't any. You don't care if people are watching. And maybe you don't even see them. You don't even see the tractor in the next field or the horses galloping round. It's a total immersive experience of being in the moment. So as you imagine that now, can you imagine how your riding or your competing would change if you could turn on that flow state at will? So I want to talk a little bit more about getting into flow, because that's the important bit. It's not exactly a state of mindfulness. It's slightly different. It's kind of linked to mindfulness, but it's slightly different because you have this natural strong focus, this strong attentional focus, but it's not the same as, if you're forced to concentrate on something, like something at work that requires you to really nitpick the details, and you don't want to do it because you're not finding it the most inspiring piece of work ever, but you force yourself to concentrate and you force yourself to do it. Flow is the opposite of that. Yes, you're in this strong focus, but it's not this imposed focus. It's very natural. It's where you want to focus and where you're finding enjoyment in your focus. That being said, however, those skills that you use when you are being mindful, so you might be just sitting in the garden, having a cup of tea, thinking about nature, going for a forest walk, those times when you are being mindful, you may also be into a flow state. So if you do practice mindfulness, it's been shown that actually you can get into flow a little bit more easily, and you might even be able to sustain the flow state a little bit longer. So when you're thinking about getting into flow, you have to think about the type of riding that you're doing, because you have to pitch it just right. So if you pitch it too easily, if you think about doing something that's far too easy, then you won't get into flow easily because you'll be distracted, because you don't really need to think about what you're doing. If you pitch it too difficult, you'll go into that forced concentration again, or you might go into a flurry of nerves because you're not getting it right. So you might come out of flow if you ever get into it and start to get frustrated or disappointed and so on, and start really, really thinking and using those frontal lobes a little bit too much again. Linked with that is thinking about the type of task as well, that it's not too repetitive. So if you are practicing a certain dressage move that you don't do over and over and over, I don't think you would anyway, but you can't go into that because again, it brings you out of flow. If you're a show jumper, practicing the same jump over and over and over might get a little bit boring for you and your horse. And again, it's probably not something that you would do, but you want to make sure you've got variety in your floor plans as well. Another thing to think about is minimizing any possible interruptions whilst you're doing your ride. That will naturally bring you out of flow because you maybe have to respond or answer the person. So it might be quite nice to do it where the yard is very quiet at a time when you can know that there's not going to be people clattering wheelbarrows near you or anything like that, that you can just be. And the last thing that I would say that would really help you to get into that state of mind is to practice the peripheral vision that we've talked about before. I'll put a link in the description box to the other podcast. It's called Hakalau. It's being in peripheral vision. It just calms the mind so much. And it's a little bit daydreamy, which is a little bit like what flow really is. And you're in this kind of altered state of ease, optimism, hope, and performance, to be honest. It really does increase your performance. So better performance, less self-judgment, less self-criticism, greater motivation, the ability to spend longer time on a certain task without getting fatigued mentally or physically, allowing you to get better and better in your riding. So what's not to like? Also gives you a nice dopamine boost. Dopamine is the reward hormone. So you feel like it's a job well done, which makes you want to go and do it all over again to get that lovely dopamine boost. Let me know how you get on with flow. It is a fabulous state to be in. Take care, and I'll see you again very soon.